Hi everyone, thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm Patrick, co-founder and CEO of Sitebulb, a website crawler and auditing tool which is incidentally perfect for online publishers. And I'll be your host today. Today we're going to be talking about SEO for news and publishing sites, and of course we'll be covering the site reputation abuse update that is the talk of the industry this week. Before I get to our expert panel, a little bit of housekeeping. We'll have some time at the end of the webinar for your questions, so please put them in the Q&A tab next to the chat. Please don't put them in the chat box itself. You can also upvote other people's questions in there if you don't have any for yourself. On our event landing page, Jojo wrote that we will be talking about AMP. In an attempt to avoid Barry throwing things at me through the screen, I have not prepared any AMP questions. So if you do want to learn about AMP, then you're going to have to ask the questions yourself, and then he can throw things at you instead. And speaking of Jojo, she's with us today and we'll be hanging out in the chat, so please go ahead and say hi to her. So our guests today span various different roles within the news and publishing space. We have Barry Adams with us, one of these, who is an independent SEO consultant who works exclusively with news publishers and is co-founder of the News and Editorial SEO Summit, an online event dedicated to news SEO. We also have Caitlin Hathaway, who works in-house at MVF, a media and marketing company managing a portfolio of owned brands. Now, I first met Caitlin at Brighton SEO last September, and since then, we've both set various grandparents and uncles to try and figure out if we might be distant cousins. We still don't know, but I now consider her family. Representing the agency side, we have Emina Demiri-Watson, who is the head of digital marketing for Vixen Digital, who regularly work with publishing clients. Go and check out the Sitebulb blog for some amazing guest content we have from Emina over the last few weeks, specifically on publishing SEO. And finally, we have Jessie Willms, late but very welcome addition to the lineup. Jessie is SEO editor for The Guardian US and co-founder of W2TF is SEO, a newsletter about search strategy for publishers. So, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. Hello. Okay, so let's start with the elephant in the room. This week, the site reputation abuse part of Google's March update kicked in. So far, this has been enforced through manual penalties to subfolders and subdomains on big publishing sites, unless anything's changed within the last hour or so. Specifically, so far, targeting coupon-related keywords. Presumably, that's the tip of the iceberg. So I'd love to know if you guys have got any early feedback or thoughts on the update, and you seeing it have any impact on sites that you work with.
Yeah, I probably will start on this one. Three of my clients have been hit. Two of them, I think, fairly, because that content just perfectly ticked the boxes what Google was looking for. One of them, I think, unfairly, because there was editorial oversight. Clearly indicated there was editorial oversight, but it still got a manual penalty. So far, the penalties have been very targeted, as in only the subfolder or subdomain in question has been penalized, and it's not in any way a site-wide downgrade, which means it's fairly, well, I wouldn't say pain-free, but it's contained. But Google have also said, Danny Sullivan has said that there will be an algorithmic component to this, which will roll out at a later stage. And algorithmic downgrades tend to be site-wide, not section-specific. So for those publishers who think they may have escaped this particular round of penalties, I would say don't count your blessings just yet. This is just the start of the whole avalanche of penalties and downgrades that we're going to see. Yeah, coupon content, betting content, I've seen that downgraded as well. But there's still a lot of other types of similar content, for example, in the travel niche, that has been unaffected so far. But it feels like just a matter of time. It's just a matter of dominoes falling. And I have mixed opinions on whether or not Google should be doing this, but that's probably more of a philosophical discussion. In practical terms, if you have some site section like this, which basically allows a third party to publish whatever the hell they want, and you get a share of the revenue, you should probably consider getting rid of it just to be on the safe side, because it might come and bite you in the ass.
Yeah, to kind of add to that, we've been really lucky. I kind of woke up this morning, and when I saw everything blowing up, I was like quickly getting onto console, seeing just in case, because you are paranoid, and there's a good reason for it, because, and this shows it, I wasn't under the impression that this is going to be just coupons. I thought that this was going to be different, and it ended up being coupons, but it might be something different when the algorithm does it and it's not manual. What concerns me is that if even in manual, where there is like kind of a QA process, human people are actually doing it, if this happens even then, what are we going to expect when actually it's not a manual, when it's an algorithm one? So I'm quite nervous about the whole thing, and I'm hoping that it's that there's some learning from this manual one, because it was massive in the community, that Google can take away and kind of apply, but we'll see.
Not sure how much they'll pay attention to what we think.
I'm trying to be positive. Patrick.
Fair, sounds fair. So have you guys been changing, your advice either internally or to clients about what they should or shouldn't be doing?
I would say that we haven't been changing advice, because we've never advised people to kind of like do spammy affiliate strategies. However, sometimes clients do things without you recommending it, or you recommending against it, which happens. So I don't think our advice has changed massively. I mean, I'm going to say to my clients, whoever has, if they do have like coupons and stuff like that, not to kind of rely on the whole like, oh, well, our team is obviously kind of managing that, because it seems like it's not. From what I've heard, Google doesn't care in some cases.
Yeah. Is there any like I don't know, just throwing an idea out, I guess. Is there any credence to the idea that maybe they're doing manual penalties specifically because they don't want to accidentally nuke these really big publishers?
No, Google has no problem nuking big publishers, even
I mean,
accidentally.
site-wide though, like the big publishers, they
Oh,
don't just
have
want
you
to
been paying
suddenly drop
attention the
out.
last few years, Patrick? There's been some major publishers who've gotten absolutely slapped by the 10-ton Google hammer in algorithm updates. Google has no qualms about doing any of that. I think the manual penalties are more of a, hey, we know this is happening, warning shot across the bow. We already got a 2-month grace period, which, to be entirely honest, is something no other industry gets. There's never been a case that I can remember where Google said, we're going to be handing out penalties in 2 months' time unless you fix your shit. This is the first time I think that actually Google said, advance notice. And a lot of publishers said, yeah, we're going to call you bluff. And now Google's like, yeah, we're serious. So this is like a second chance for publishers to mend their ways. And if they then don't mend their ways, then I think Google will come down with the algorithmic hammer. And that's going to be hurting a lot more.
Definitely think with all the commotions going on Twitter and everybody showcasing which kind of publishers are engaging in those tactics and they are benefiting, that 2-month grace period was a really interesting, but that's not really been seen before. And there was a lot of focus on coupons at the time, but there's also a lot of parasite domains where like maybe they don't realize that they're engaging in this sort of thing and they can clean up their act, or it's this warning signal to say, we have noticed you, and there has been manual penalties in this case that have been dished out now. Really, really keen to see the algorithmic impact, and with all the core updates that have been happening, really don't know how that's going to go. But I think as soon as that, if there is any advance warning on Twitter, whether the update is dropped or we'll just start seeing Systrix charts and all of this decreases and declines or uplifts, like it will be a very big impact, I'm sure.
Yeah, this sort of update's definitely good for Systrix, right? The amount of visibility graphs we've all seen in the last couple of days. All right.
Yeah, the best graphs though, and the most accurate and up to date. But
no, yeah, it's really good. It's really good. Okay, so I guess we can talk about that update all day, probably. I guess we still don't really know. So I'm gonna proceed with kind of the rest of the questions we've prepared, so that doesn't take over the whole webinar, because it could very easily. So I want to talk about technical SEO initially, and like the role when it comes to publishing. So for instance, can you get away with just having a strong brand and amazing content and not worrying about technical SEO, or is technical SEO absolutely crucial?
I mean, I think obviously Barry's on this call, so he has the most expertise in this particular vertical of SEO, but technical SEO is very much the foundation of all good sites, and you're really trying to build a house on shaky foundation if you don't have your technical SEO lined up correctly. So I would say technical SEO is probably where you want to start. And then from there, once you've got that solid, go into continuing to build your brand and continuing to publish content that aligns with your audience interest and your long-term overall strategic objectives. But I would say technical SEO is probably the starting line.
You can rank in Google in general and in news in particular with terrible technical SEO, but it would be like running a marathon with a leg cut off. You're not going to get anywhere fast. Yes, you need to get your site in order. And that's the interesting bit about news publishers, because of the speed with which news moves and how fast Google needs to crawl and index your content. The emphasis on tech SEO for publishers is a little different than for like an e-commerce website or a brochure website. So you have to focus more on fast crawling and fast indexing, and just making sure that there are no obstacles you put in place to Google finding your content and extracting content from your basically your HTML source code. Google says that, for example, they will render every single web page that they crawl and index, and we know that is a bold-faced lie because we know they don't. They try to, but they probably don't. And even when they do, it tends to be a delayed process. So even in Google's technical guidelines for news publishers, they quite clearly state, don't put core body content in JavaScript-enabled code, because chances are Google just won't see it on time. So that's one of the things that, for example, would separate a news publisher from a regular e-commerce website. No critical content in JavaScript, period. And there's lots of other little things that you have to just keep in mind when it comes to tech SEO, which I could probably bore you all to death with, but that's not why we're here, is it?
Yeah,
So
I mean, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I echo what Barry was saying, because that was my first thought, was you can have the most amazing, you could have a breaking news article that nobody has picked up and is the best report ever. But if you hide it behind like heavy Java, it's not going to get, it's not going to be ranking when it needs to be ranking. And the other thing with Jessie's point, I think I agree. Technical needs to be a foundation, but what happens a lot of the times, especially in publishers, is that it's not the foundation when you come in as an agency. So you have these very big, clunky legacy websites that have all kinds of technical issues with it because they have been outsourced to a developer, and not every developer will have that SEO mindset, and particularly not have that SEO mindset when it comes to publishers and knowing all of these little intricacies around technical SEO when it comes to them. So it's a work in progress, I can say, for a lot of my clients, for example.
Yeah.
Working in newsrooms, I'll also say, sort of to add on this, is that I think often the challenge is you might be the only person doing SEO, and you're a content person, and you don't have technical expertise, and you don't have a background as a web developer, and you don't speak the language of the team who actually is in charge of this, and you might not have access to that team, and those resources might be limited and focused on other business priorities. So I would also just say, like, to caveat, like issues with technical SEO is like, sometimes when you're working in news, you just have to do with the best with the resources that you have available. And if you're the only person working in a newsroom as a solo content SEO, I feel your pain, and like there are some things that are just outside of your control. So I'd always just like caveat that by just knowing that like in newsrooms, all resources are limited, and like technical SEO resources are definitely very, very limited.
So if there's such a big focus on making everything as quick and easy as possible for search engines, where does like structured data fit into everything? Like, there tends to be two schools of thought with structured data. It's like either just specifically do for Google, or like mark up everything. Do you have a sort of, well, where do you stand on that? And do you have like a third space specifically for news?
I mean,
Yeah,
no, my opinions have changed on this, to be entirely honest. I used to think mark up everything, make it all machine readable. But now I'm more like, what I'm seeing, and I hope others are seeing the same, but if you don't, please do correct me. I'm seeing that Google used to reward like having really long, detailed structured data snippets. They just listed everything in the news article, everything related to it. But fairly recently, probably a year or so ago, I started seeing websites outperform in both Discover and in top stories that had very small news article snippets with just the required attributes and nothing else in there, which was a new one to me, because I always thought more info to provide to Google, the better Google understands your content, your article, and the better Google can rank it. Now I think actually Google has changed how they index content, and they still use the structured data. But I think they now primarily try to understand the article as they extract it from the HTML and use the structured data as a sanity check. Well, it used to be the other way around, where the structured data was the primary source of indexing, and then the HTML was sort of the backup option. And one of the reasons that I think this is, we used to see the structured data headline attribute always show up in top stories as the headline. And that is still primarily the case, but increasingly I see the actual title tag show up as the headline in top stories. And that's new. That didn't used to happen. You used to just get either the visible headline or the structured data headline as the headline in top stories. But now we also see the title tag. So I'm like, wait, Google is changing the emphasis here. So in reflection on structured data, I would now say, if you're having an opportunity to redo structured data for your website, keep it a small snippet, just some required, maybe a few recommended attributes, nothing too elaborate. It tends to seem to work better nowadays. But at the same time, if you have a long detailed snippet already, I just say leave it intact. It's probably not worth fixing at this stage. Yeah. I think you get more mileage out of better on-page SEO rather than trying to maximize your structured data snippets.
Nice.
Yeah, I kind of echo that. I think a balanced approach, starting off with the most important things is important, and then kind of maybe looking at expanding if you have the resources for it. Again, to Jessie's point, often there's no resources for doing these things. So it can be tricky, but minimal structured data. I've noticed as well, Barry, the title thing. I was a little bit like, oh, what's going on there? But it kind of also makes sense, because in my mind, structured data also can be manipulated quite easily. So you can't really rely on structure, because SEOs, a lot of like black hat SEOs would have been all over that if that was still like as important as it used to be.
Okay, cool. Right, so let's shift gear and explore some content questions now. So this one might be totally different for all of the different roles I suppose we've got on this call. But one thing I'm fascinated to know is how much input or influence do you can have as an SEO when it comes to the creation of new content when working with publishers?
I'll happy to start. I'd say in my experience, having been before an agency and an in-house little SaaS company and then moving more into a new space, it surprised me how much of an SEO acumen like the whole company had, and they really cared about it and they really prioritized it, which was fantastic, meaning there was always a seat at the table. So that's fantastic to get my content prioritizations like listened to. However, there's a bit of work that needs to be done where you need to prove why they should pursue an opportunity, align it to their brand and audience. So when I say brand, it might be a particular website, or we have a portfolio of websites, we call them portfolio brands. You need to make sure it's aligned to what they want to offer to them, but what makes sense for you and obviously achieves your goals. So for instance, in my approach, I'd say that data never lies. Why I'd want them to pursue an idea, like I try to back that up with things like search volume, or if there's like a clear trend, because the SEMrush and all the other keyword tools, they're going to see that there's a search volume of 0, but they're obviously like Newswire, things react really fast, and that doesn't track with those tools, and you have to keep up. So you have to use different data sources, but you have to explain why they want to pursue that. The other thing I like to use is data from our insights team. So they've spoken to the sales team and the customers, and they know exactly what people are focused on, what their pain points and motivations are. And people might not even be searching for that right now. So when you can bring that data to the table, that makes it a lot more better for you and better for the brand that you're working with to trust your recommendations. But definitely there's a lot of collaboration that goes on. You have to listen to each other so you're both achieving your goals. But that's my experience, anywho.
Awesome.
I'll just add on. So I basically only do content stuff in the newsrooms that I've worked in the roles that I've had. And so for me, it's a lot of looking at Google Trends with Glimpse, also asked other keyword research tools in order to find questions that our readers are asking on topics that we care about, and then sending that over to editorial teams, desks, specific editors and reporters as sort of an outline and a structure of here are things that I think we should include in an explainer, a timeline, or some sort of supplementary piece. Often when I take these pitches to desks, it's as our secondary piece of content. So we have the main news file, and this is how we're sort of rounding out our coverage to make sure that we have our main on the news item that the reporters are writing on the ground, and then also taking the opportunity to, because SEO in the newsrooms that I've worked in has always sat within a broader audience team, what we're really trying to do when we look at Google Trends and look at other search tools, what we're trying to do is have an audience-first mindset. So rather than thinking about exclusively, here's what the story is, because I as an editor think this is what the story is, we're trying to figure out what is the complement to that news file that the audience is clearly asking for. So looking for the particular questions that are on Google Trends rising interest to see if there's anything that we've missed in our coverage, if there's gaps, if there's other opportunities or other storylines for us to hit on, because ultimately we want is readers to come to us and read our coverage on key news events that we really care about, and search for us is one of those ways that we can find and bring in that audience. So when it comes to content creation, this is what I do most of the day, is trying to figure out what stories people are interested in and using Google to find, and then how can we make sure that our coverage includes those key storylines and elements.
Cool.
Yeah. And I've had really strong, and just to the point that Caitlin was making about data, people are really receptive to, I think there's a strong audience for this particular topic, and writing about it will see X, Y, Z. Audience interest are these key metrics that we care about. And fortunately, I've only worked with editors who are really receptive to that, as long as you speak the same language as the people that you're talking to.
Awesome. So are you do you have a plan for the day that can get completely capsized by a news story that just comes in, and you're then on that?
I think that's it. That's the universal experience of every editor that I've ever met working in news. You have a plan for the day, and then you go to the meeting and you realize we're doing something else. And so I think the key skill, if you're working in news and journalism, because it moves so fast, is you just have to be adaptive and receptive and willing to change focus and priority hour by hour, day by day, because often you're not, often audience, the conversation is being driven by what's happening. And so you just have to be receptive and reactive to that. But yeah, definitely have had days where I thought, I'm just going to work on this content outline for a series that I know we're running in the summer, and that's going to be my main priority. And then, that's totally gone by 10 a.m.
Exciting, at least. Keeps you on your toes. All right. So dealing with lots of different writers constantly producing content, how do you handle the quality control aspect? And is that the responsibility of SEO, or is that for somebody else?
Us as an agency, we don't have as much input or as much power really as some of the in-house teams. And coming back to what you were saying around kind of what is our role, I think a big piece for how to get involved and how to manage writers as well is kind of this education piece that needs to happen. That will then avoid the extensive QA afterwards. One of the things, and I've read Barry's excellent article around why you need to optimize everything before you actually hit publish. And for me, that's the basis of it all. And it goes with writers as well. It avoids that QA. If you can educate your writers why they're doing these things, and that's hard, because I was a journalist, I didn't care about SEO when I was doing that. I just want to write my news story, I want to get it out. I don't want to be thinking about a title tag and then 5 different types of headings and all that. It didn't even occur. So one of the things that we're doing now with one of our clients is I'm planning workshops and also a publisher course type of thing, just to get that education piece going, that you can then share also with your writers, with your editorial team, and I know Caitlin does a lot on automation. I've been thinking about how I can put in some automation in some of that as well.
Definitely keen to follow up there. We, as our SEO team, we used to do a lot of the manual checks, and we used to fix those issues ourselves. We're really quite a small publisher in the comparison like big publishers. That proved to be such a time-consuming activity. It would take days at a time to go and audit, fix those issues. It's just like, it's impossible. There's so much more higher value activities you could be doing. So I think on the emphasis what you said, Emina, about having guidelines, having workshops, and like creating SEO champions within the writing team and like the content teams themselves, so they can flag those issues and be able to learn how to fix them themselves, is a lot more of a collaborative approach. If you could bake that in their process, that is much more powerful. And we've got automated sheets that we could do to flag those issues. And then what we do now is that we feed those by month to say like, these are the areas or like the trends that we're seeing. If you could keep on top of those, if you can go back and fix them, if it's like evergreen content, that would be really, really helpful. That's proved to just save us a lot more time. Like 2 days of our month is saved, at least on that process alone. And it just makes sure that having our content optimized with pre-publish is just a lot more impactful. So definitely a big believer in that.
Yeah, if anyone wants to learn more specifically about what Caitlin's put together for her company, there's a post which I'm sure Jojo will go and put in the chat. Well, there you go. She's just done it now, which goes over all the processes that she's put in place to deal with all those sorts of things. So please read that 'cause it's awesome. Okay, so I want to talk about I suppose it goes alongside the last question a little bit in terms of education. How do you deal with this ever-changing landscape of algorithm updates? Monitoring, adjusting, trying to get everybody aware, I suppose, and like what they should or should not be doing as it changes forever. Anyone?
I mean, oh, go, Jessie.
All I was going to say was as long-term thinking and thinking audience first rather than Google first. Like, I think anything that you do because it's a tactic is eventually going to tire itself out and stop working. So like I'm in the newsrooms that I've worked in, there isn't like company-wide education about Google algorithm updates. I think that has a tendency to scare writers and reporters a bit. Obviously, key stakeholders who do need to know about algorithm updates get that at a regular cadence in internal meetings. And then I would just say, like, the training that we do provide, or that I have done in previous roles, has always very much focused on like the North Star of like, we want to create journalism that is found on search, rather than like, here's what we need to do because of the last algorithm update. So I'd always just caution, like, it's just long-term strategic thinking. And if you're too, I think that sometimes we're a little too, and this may be just me because I'm tired, a little too focus on the minutia of individual core algorithm updates. And I think if we just like zoom out a little bit and focus on our core pillars of what we're good at, and have that as your North Star, I think that would be my starting line, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the same thing. I have this, like, my skin just crawls. I don't know why when I hear, which is crazy because I'm an SEO, but because I studied journalism, I have a big passion for it. I did, I was a journalist. Every time, it's just, there's something kind of like the emphasis on algorithm updates just takes it away a little bit from what journalism actually is, which is, it's crazy that I'm saying this considering that I'm an SEO, but that's, my emotional side reacts to it that way. My rational side, the way that I kind of approach it with clients, really is just keeping the line of a communication very open. Just making sure that, not freaking them out. What you don't want to do is you don't want to be kind of heads up, there's a big algorithm update coming and making everybody panic. That's not what it is. It's, again, the education piece, making sure that, as Jessie says, you have the North Star and that you explain what is an algorithm update, how is it rolled out, why knee-jerk reactions to them are not a good idea. So again, it all comes back to this kind of education communication piece, I think.
Yeah, the communication element is so important, as a lot of eyes are currently, like, especially with the updates that are going on, like in the past year, we had so many of them. We had a few in succession. We've had the March core algorithm update, and then we've had the warning that just come obviously like a few days ago on Sunday. There's a lot of communication to prepare everybody that that's coming and that you're aware, you're monitoring it, you're tracking it. knee-jerk reactions are like an absolute no-go. Like you should not be doing anything like that and drastically doing any actions until after we've had the analysis, because you don't want to control the narrative, but you want to be truthful, but you don't want to induce any sort of panic, especially in obviously the landscape that we have today. So I'd say communication is something that we've really focused on, just to make sure that everybody is fully aware, and just know exactly what it is that it entails is really important.
Awesome. All right. We haven't heard from Barry lately, so I've got a question which is designed specifically for Barry's thoughts, and anyone else who has to deal with really big sites, and particularly crawling them, please also pitch in. So when you're crawling sites with millions of pages, like I find when I'm dealing with customers talking about this sort of thing, that they often feel like the temptation to want to crawl the whole thing. But you can't possibly be doing this every day or even probably every week. So what do you do instead?
Yeah, don't crawl the whole website. The largest website I've ever worked on had, I think, 300 million indexed URLs. Roughly, I'm not entirely sure, because that's the Google Search Console gets a little bit iffy as well. You don't need to crawl all pages on the website. You do need to be smart about how you crawl. I don't think just crawling from the homepage and setting it to like 1 million URLs max is necessarily always the best approach. Generally, it is how I start, by the way. It's how I just configure Sitebulb to crawl. And then once that initial crawl is done, then I sometimes, if it's a big website, do focus calls on like a site section, for example, to get more sense of the depth of that particular section. The key to understanding the technical setup and the SEO issues that plague a website is always to look for patterns. When a certain type of page, be it an article template or a category page or a paginated page, has an issue, chances are every single implementation of that same template has that same issue. Of course, you will want to sanity check that, but that's the reason why you don't need to call the entire website. You need to call enough pages to get a sense of where the issues might lie, and then you can do more focused calls on specific areas of the website. For example, author pages, you can call those deeper, or a particular section like the sports section of a publisher, or one of my clients has a finance and investment section which behaves very differently from the rest of the website, so I call that one as a separate project in Sitebulb. And then you look for those patterns, you look for template-based issues, and you try to address those. There are very few scenarios where you will want to crawl the entire website. I sometimes get asked, how do we find all internal links that result in a redirect? The hard answer to that is you probably can't, if your website is that big. You can probably find some patterns, but there will always be some cases of old URLs linked from deeper pages that result in an internal redirect. And it's okay to leave those in place. You don't have to have a perfect website as long as you fix the low-hanging fruit. If you have a link in your top navigation that results in a redirect, you want to fix that, because that's repeated on every single URL on your website, same in your footer. But if it's like a deep article from 17 years ago that has a link that results in a redirect, or even in a 404, probably not worth digging back and finding those and fixing those, because you're not going to get any payoff from the amount of work that would require. So it's based on templates, based on finding patterns, and being a bit more focused and smart with your calls. And I have to say, and again, I don't get paid to say this, I do love Sitebulb for that especially the cloud version, you can just set and forget, do your call, don't worry about credits or anything like that, and just get all the data that you need to do a proper site audit. Since I started using Sitebulb Cloud, I'm a lot less anxious about starting a big call, because I used to be like, right, if the call goes haywire and there's like a call trap somewhere, I'm going to be wasting like my entire monthly allocation of URLs on this one single call. Whereas now I'm like, yeah, I'll just start the call again and exclude certain URLs from it. So you have to be smart about the tools that you use and not overspend on tools that promise you technical SEO golden mountains. You have to do the hard work yourself still. You have to interpret the data and do some sanity checking, and not just look at a report and say, right, we're going to fix all of those things, because a lot of them might not be worth fixing or might not be issues in the first place.
Yeah, and that kind of connects to, like, in general, what happens in SEO, not just with publishers, but across, is this kind of whole, you get these technical audits that are very in depth, but people are obsessed with kind of 404s are a great example in fixing all of the issues that and you can't with a big site, you just can't do that. So in a way, it's good to stop you from kind of going haywire on some of these like things that actually are not a problem, but for some reason somebody once said, oh, Google doesn't like this, and now it's all over the place, and the whole industry is trying to solve 404s, which are completely normal. I mean, I can't believe that still happens, if I'm honest.
Also, 404s don't consume crawl budget. The moment Google gets the 404 status code, it just moves on to the next URL. It never even looks at the data it gets from the 404. It just moves on. Also, by the way, means that if you have links on your 404 pages, Google never sees those because Google never parses the content of your 404 pages. It just looks at the 404 status code, same with the 410, and then just skips that URL and goes to the next one.
Love it. All right, Barry, your check's in the post, by the way. Okay, right. We can't possibly have a webinar in 2024 where we don't mention AI at all, considering the state of the industry, and everyone's got an opinion. So, are you integrating AI into your processes, and if so, how?
I can only speak for like what I'm doing for the newsletter because I don't really use AI in my day-to-day job. But what I would say is I think the thing that's interesting for me is not AI for content creation, but AI for doing just the boring tasks and tedious work. And I haven't really used this in my professional life yet, but I have used it a little bit for like some newsletter stuff on the side. And I used to teach I teach data journalism on the side, and like I love pivot tables so much, and yet if ChatGPT can do some data analysis for me, and I don't have to plug away at a spreadsheet, and I don't have to do any of the data cleanup work in the spreadsheet myself, like that is such a gift from AI. So while I'll say like I'm not super keen on AI for content creation, because I think if I don't like, I've never wanted to read any of the things that I see from AI. And so it's like, if I don't want to read it, why would I want to publish it? But I do think like AI can be a really smart computer. And if you use it to do some of like the boring menial tasks that are taking up your brain space and your time, I think that could be a good use case for it. So even when it comes to like classifying content into categories and having ChatGPT for Google Docs or Google Spreadsheets, doing some of that like bucketing work for you so that you can do a better analysis faster, I think that is the only thing that has really interested me about AI so far. I'm not interested in reading AI content, unfortunately.
I mean, for me, it kind of goes in the bucket with like too much focus on the algorithm changes. With journalism, you know, to use AI to actually do news articles, I mean, for me, that's like complete blasphemy. It just goes against every pore in my body. But I echo what Jessie said. I think for data analysis, sometimes that's good. Very quickly can do a few things. I'd be very careful about using it for stuff like keyword research, for example, because those are not real volumes there. It also doesn't take, you know, SERPs into consideration really most of the time. And so we use it for, I was using it actually today, looking at how I can turn some of the stuff that I've written about publisher SEOs, how can I turn that into checklists and resources that I can use with my clients when I'm training the editorial teams. It's very interesting when you try and give it a prompt to think like a journalist. I'm not sure it always works. Some of the stuff that it gave me, it's a bit suspect.
And can I just go back? I should have said this off the top, but before you think about using AI specifically if you're working in a newsroom or working with publishers, the very first thing you have to do is check your editorial guidelines and standards and have a clear communication and conversation with the entire newsroom about what the standards are and what is and is not allowed. There are definitely publishers who have very clearly defined rules. Do not put our content into ChatGPT. Do not use ChatGPT to write a headline. Do not use it to do XYZ. So even before you touch it for like data analysis, and that's why I said I haven't done this in either my last two roles. I haven't used ChatGPT in my actual job, but I have used it for the newsletter on the side. the first thing you want to do is make sure that the entire newsroom is on board with the same set of guidelines for AI. I would say that's #1 priority.
I definitely echo saying, in terms of operation-wise and data kind of analysis-wise, ChatGPT or any other AI tool, there's some really good ones out there you should definitely explore. The biggest ick is when you see ChatGPT content and, oh my goodness, it's all over LinkedIn and Twitter at the moment. It's just so obvious. The words that are being used, to the point where I see some headlines and I see a word and I'm like, I feel like that might be a ChatGPT, and it's not. But because it's like elevate and supercharge and all these sorts of things, it's just so obvious. Delve is one of the worst ones. I'm trying to avoid using it in my actual day-to-day language. Sometimes it slips out and I'm like, oh my goodness, ChatGPT influence. But definitely recommend exploring it and trying to build solutions that work for you. So for instance, there might be ways that you can automate your sheets or like your monitoring systems, where I've consulted with ChatGPT to help me build the formulas or build the app scripts that enabled me to automate certain manual tasks, which is really important. Loads of time savings achieved there. In audience research, is a little bit, obviously it's very, very new to the game and there's not much that you can explore. But for instance, Bing Microsoft Copilot lets you use ChatGPT within, not ChatGPT, the name escapes me, the Bing version of Microsoft AI in the browser. And I think that that's really important and to have a look at that, as you can get some interesting data where it's deciphered and analyzed, kind of just new insights that you might not have uncovered. So it could be a new kind of like area for you to look into. I've written up about a guide on how to do that. Inventory and auditing as well, where I mentioned about content themes and tagging, a lot of use there, but just make sure that you're manually reviewing everything and giving a human review, because the amount of times it's given the most wildest category themes to some of the URLs I've suggested, yeah, definitely, if you can vet them, I'd say just human review everything, but just experiment with using AI in your processes. I think there might be a lot of value to get out of it.
Yeah, just to add about the themes and the topics, one of the things that people wrongly do is try to use ChatGPT for like a topical, to put their news articles or whatever you're doing into topics that are kind of SEO relevant. It doesn't work like that. ChatGPT will not be looking at the how these topics are connected or anything. It will just look at a keyword and decide, okay, I think this is the topic that you should put it in. Where if you did proper topical research, then you might find that actually it could fit into a much better topic that has search volume, that answers the questions. So again, it's not an SEO tool, so I don't think it should be used like that.
All right, cool, guys. I've just had a peek through the Q&A and there's quite a lot of questions in there. So I think it would make sense to stop my questions and move on to them. So Jojo's just going to go through them and she'll start pulling them on the screen. If you've got any last questions that you want to add, please go ahead and add them and upvote any that you like the sound of, that you want answers to, because they're the ones that we're going to get. We'll get to first. We'll try and get to all of them if we can, but who knows how long it will take. So while Jojo's on with that, I will very briefly explain Sitebulb to any newcomers. Sitebulb is a website crawling tool that makes auditing websites easier. We have for a long time been known solely as a desktop crawler, but last summer we launched Sitebulb Cloud, which can now operate at the extreme scale that publishing businesses require. So our biggest publishing customer is crawling 60 sites a week, roughly 100,000 euros per site. So that's about 24 million euros a month. And we're genuinely a fraction of the cost of other cloud crawlers. So if that's piqued your interest, please check out sitebulb.com/cloud, where you can learn more about it and book in a demo with me. Right, Jojo, are you ready with the first question now that I'm done with the sales pitch? All right, yes. Barry, let me show you. Hang on.
I'm just curious. I have a whole whiskey cabinet myself, so I'm always curious what other people have.
Yeah, you're going to regret asking this because the answer is football based. That is a limited edition Captain Morgan with the captain of the Leicester City football team, which was my club from when they won the Premier League in 2015-16. It was 8 years ago, I think, yesterday or the day before. So
yeah, and
yes.
didn't you just bounced down a league and now
Yeah,
bouncing
we've
back
just
up a
come back
league.
up, so it's all good. It's all good.
All
We're
good,
back.
all good.
We'll be winning the league again, you know, in 2 years' time. And yeah, one of only 3,000 ever produced. So yes, it'll have to be like a family heirloom. Right. Oh, we've right. We're not allowed to talk about that anymore. So, what's the most common technical issue that news websites tend to face?
I wrote an article about that not too long ago. So
Oh,
if you'll allow
shall we
me, pagination, uncrawlable pagination is probably the one I see most often, where infinite scroll or load more buttons with JavaScript, load more articles. Google doesn't click, Google doesn't scroll, so Google never sees beyond the first page. And we do actually want Google to see beyond the first page of content. We do want Google to see a substantial body of work associated with a topic, so on a section page or a tag page. So we need some level of crawlable pagination there. So that's probably one of the more common technical issues that I see. Unoptimized HTML, like I said before, that's probably the only context in which clean HTML source code actually matters.
Yeah.
Because Google needs to index news articles fast and therefore bases it initially on the HTML only. And the things that tend to go wrong or are not always optimized are the order of the header tags, the meta tags. You want to have your title, your open graph tags, your canonicals fairly high up in the header section, and avoid using body HTML tags like image and iframe in the header. And the article HTML from the H1 headline, and yes, it should be an H1 tag around your headline, down to the last paragraph should be relatively clean, uninterrupted block of HTML. Now, that sort of stuff is more about reducing the chances of errors rather than actually increasing traffic. 99 times out of 100, Google doesn't have hiccups when it indexes HTML, even unoptimized HTML. But the one time Google does have a hiccup, it's usually one of those articles you absolutely want Google to index very, very quickly. So it's reducing the probability of errors occurring. And other things, like I said earlier, like having 3-1 redirected URLs in your top navigation. People tend not to realize that those exist because they click on the link and it works. But if you go through one or more redirect hops, you do actually lose a little bit of link value, a little bit of link equity through a redirect. So that's a fairly common issue as well. Emina, what are you seeing on publisher
I
websites?
mean, those are kind of what I see as well most often. One of the really interesting one for me is it's not. I mean, it's a technical issue. It becomes a technical issue, but our use of categories and tags and things like that. I think that's very much entrenched in content, in on-page SEO and kind of your strategy. But it's also a technical issue because you have all of these. I mean, the amount of tags and things that I have seen people just create willy-nilly when there is actually a very optimized tag that I'm trying to pursue. And then you have these very, very thin kind of tag pages that don't basically do nothing, which yeah, like from a technical point of view, stuff around internal linking is an interesting one as well. We've seen that so many times and I can understand it. Again, journalists don't have time to be, sitting down and internally, especially inline links, you have every article will have some links. You might have them in like read more or related articles or for tags or whatever it may be. Those are automatic, but it's the one that you put in your text that actually can be quite useful. And that doesn't really happen. But again, this is going back to the education piece, and it is a technical error. I mean, internal linking, I always think that in terms of technical is quite important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we got another question then. Here we go. Okay, this is for you, Jessie. Speaking of Google Trends, how do you tackle topics finding during the day and monitoring the trending topics? Do you have any tips for SEOs working with newsrooms?
Great question. I'll put the newsletter in the chat in a second, but I would say time frame can be really useful and important, and your regional filtering. So so one thing I look at every couple times a day is the W5. So who, what, where, when, why. And then change the time frame to 1 hour, and then you can kind of get an indication of two things. One, what students are learning in school, because often it's these like funny historical questions. You're like, oh, it's this lesson currently across American schools, which is funny and interesting. But 2, you do get questions about like, why is X happening, or what time does this thing start? And so that can be a little signal of like, here are things that people are interested in learning. And if you work for a local outlet, the SEO editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer, I cannot remember her name off the top of my head, but I'll put the link to the newsletter where she said this. She does that in the specific region that her paper covers, and just does the W5, or we'll put in some related queries into Google and just close the time frame down to see what people are looking for in the morning. The other tip and trick I would say is sometimes you can look at, like, sometimes it'll work and sometimes it'll give you interesting thing. But if you look at like key like search terms, like if you're interested in what people are searching from TikTok, if you search trends, sometimes you can see a little bit of like, what are the trends that people are Googling versus just looking at on TikTok as a platform, or like outage or shortage. And so like that, like, let's say, for example, there was another recall, or recall is another one. So if you put in some of those like specific search terms and then like change the filtering and change the location, you might get some tips on things that people are looking for right now. And that might be useful for like breaking or emerging news. And then otherwise, I just look at Google Trends several times a day, and then look at not only like what is trending on Google, but also key topics that we care about, and seeing if there are new questions that are rising, emerging, or being asked that we haven't covered. The other thing I'll say on the part of the question about how do you work with the newsroom, I would say when you're an SEO editor in a newsroom, part of your job, a significant part of your job, is working in translation. So taking what you see in terms of like SEO trends and converting it to language that your editors and reporters will understand. So I wouldn't give someone a search volume metric, because I don't know that they would necessarily find that intuitive to understand as an editor. And I wouldn't really want to pitch a story saying like, here's why we should do it for exclusively Google reasons. So I would always make sure that whatever you see on Google is good, but always translate it into a framework that the people that you're talking to will understand. So even if that means rewriting questions that you're seeing on Google so that you know that they are going to be more receptive, I think it's worth doing. Even if you lose maybe a little bit of precision from Google Trends to how you've rewritten it, I think getting people's buy-in is really important as a long-term part of your strategy. And then the other piece I'll just say is like Glimpse with Google Trends is one of my favorite tools. Also Asked I've been using recently and is like kind of fun. And then the Google Trends team has an email that they send out every day. They have US, UK, and one other geography that I can't remember, specific editions. And I find that really useful because it's curated. The value in that newsletter is that they are picking out things that are interesting to look at. And at least once per email, I say, oh, that'd be a great story idea if we could cover this in a way that makes sense for our outlet. And the other thing about that newsletter that's really great is you sort of build your instincts. Like you can see by reading that email every day, you kind of get a sense of how people search and what questions they ask. So I would also say Google Trends, their email, and I'll find the link and I'll put it in the chat, is a very useful thing to be looking at when it comes to finding story ideas throughout the day.
Right. So in summary, just stay on top of everything everywhere. Yeah. Awesome. Right. So what are the good and reliable sources left for publishers, small and medium publishers? Even social media platforms also started adding AI answers, for example, Meta AI. Okay, I'm gonna leave that there for a moment so we can pass what the question means.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Loyalty, audience loyalty. You have to become immune to the whims of the big tech giants because their greed knows no bounds, and they will continue stealing from everybody and everything in pursuit of increased shareholder value. I mean, there has never been a higher demand for news than there is now. The advertising market has never been bigger, and yet publishers have never had less revenue. And the reason for that is that the big tech companies just gobble up all the fucking money. The only way you can overcome that is to have a loyal audience that bypasses the tech giants, bypasses the gatekeepers, and goes directly to your website and subscribes to your website, pays you the money directly. And yes, that's hard. That is bloody hard to do. So you have to have something that is unique, that is worthwhile, that is valuable enough that people are willing to do that to become a loyal reader and a loyal audience. But that is the only way you can maintain consistent levels of traffic and revenue, because putting your eggs in any single tech giant's basket, be that Google or Apple or Facebook or whoever, or TikTok, it's just going to be a losing strategy in the long run. And I'm saying this as a Google guy, I'm saying this as a pure SEO fella. Don't do just SEO. You have to build a loyal audience, and yeah, that's hard.
I just want to echo this and say, I live in Canada, and last year there was a big fight between our government and the platforms. And so in Canada, there is no news on Meta. There's no news on Instagram. There's no news on Facebook. So what was once a really healthy and robust source of traffic to publisher websites is zero. And I can't even look at American outlets on Instagram. It's just blocked. And I think that plus like the pivot to video from 2016, when publishers really heavily invested in video because we were getting signals from Facebook that was worth it. I think that those two things should be lessons about you need to think about two things: tactics and strategy. Strategy is long-term, tactics, it might be how you get there. But to echo Barry's point, I think we should learn from what big platforms and tech giants have done previously, which is not particularly care about our business. And when I say our business, I mean journalism and the institution, the value that we provide. And just know that they don't actually care about whether or not journalism survives the next 50 years, and build as many relationships as directly as you can with readers on platforms that you own, operate, and control. And also maybe as an exercise, like eliminate your Google traffic from your reporting for a period of a week and see what you're left with, and see what works for your actual subscribers who come, like your real readers, and then figure out like, okay, if Google went away tomorrow, how would we make up that revenue? And then use that as a starting point for thinking about alternative revenue streams or ways to engage and monetize your audience. But I think to Barry's point, I don't think any of these platforms really care about the health of journalism. And so I would say long-term strategic thinking and building audience where you own it.
Cool. Okay, we've got probably maybe one or two more questions. Sorry, time left for questions. Right. So how to appear in Google Discovery in this AI era? Some advice or recommendations, or if you've written articles on this, please tell us.
Some of the advice that I've shared in the series kind of covers Google Discover in particular. So there are some intricacies with Google Discover that kind of don't apply to some of don't apply to traditional search, really. I mean, some of it comes from the intrinsic stuff that we've spoken about like the quickness of crawling and things like that. Other things that you can look at is images. For example, Discover says that your image should be of a particular size. Now, I am a little bit suspect of that because I have seen with clients that they rank and Discover even though their images are below I think it's 1,200 pixels or something like that. And I've seen that they do rank even without that, but it's best practice. So you might want to kind of consider optimizing your images as well. With Discover, also one of the things that we've seen research, and Lily Ray was talking a lot about kind of the headlines and how catchy headlines for Discover in particular really work. And we're talking about active, like verbs. We're talking about, don't go clickbaity. It needs to kind of stop the scroll, but not bait the click. So just thinking a little bit about how you structure it to be, but you would do that anyway. I mean, a lot of the stuff that you do for Discover, I would say you should be doing for your readers and ranking in general. But that's what we've seen, at least with Discover traffic.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we are pretty much out of time. We've got one last one in. Okay, right. We're going to have to answer it quickly then. To what extent is it useful, important to have an HTML sitemap to old content? New York Times has a huge, well-curated HTML sitemap. However, will this be contributing to site bloat? Is there a time cutoff point at which it is not worth linking to old stories?
No, such HTML sitemaps are good, are useful. There's ways to structure them so that they point to section pages and tag pages, which then after that the pagination takes over. The deeper pagination, the lower the link value, ergo the lower the core budget spent on those pages. And even a big sitemap would be what, 200, 300 URLs. For Google, that's a drop in the bucket. You know, you need to start worrying about core budget when you get over 500,000 URLs. Below that, don't worry about it.
Awesome. Look at that. Beautifully succinct there, Mary. Thank you very much. Great. So that's all we've got time for today. So thank you all very much for watching and for your fantastic questions. And thanks, of course, to all our amazing guests for generously giving up their time and expertise. We will be publishing the webinar over the next few days on the website and emailing that out to everyone who registered. So if you missed the start, don't worry, you can catch up. Our next webinar is the same time, 4 weeks from today, Wednesday, 5th of June. We'll be talking about how to grow your agency in 2024 while keeping quality standards high. So keep an eye out on our socials for the announcement. We'll hopefully see you there. Please do go ahead and read all the amazing content that Emina and Caitlin have published on the Sitebulb blog. Please go and subscribe to the newsletters that both Jessie and Barry produce. And you have the Nest Summit, Barry, as well. Quick plug if you want.
Yeah, 29th and 30th of October. We've got a fantastic speaker lineup lined up already, including Rand Fishkin, Martin Split, Glenn Gabe, Lily Ray, a whole load of others. Tickets available now on newsseo.io.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.